Hello and welcome to another episode of the Expanse Abridged Podcast series. Today we've got chapter 12 of Leviathan Wakes. It's a Miller chapter. It's a little bit of a slow one, I have to admit. It's not as exciting as what we've had with Holden, particularly last time. So to re-jog our memory, we've got Miller. So the last time we saw Miller, he was doing some investigating stuff, because that is his job, even if he's not very good at it, or does a lot of it. And he was investigating the extortion ring. There'd been a change in who was doing extortion, and a new guy had come into that shop with the 16-year-old full of porn and said, "I'm working for the OPA. I need some money." And that guy had been doing that. And Miller was like, "What the fuck's going on?" When it found out, because he went to speak to some OPA guys, because he was like, "Was the OPA making a move?" They were like, "We weren't." And the chapter ended with that guy, that chapter finalized, with that guy, Matteo Giard, turning up dead. And he was like, "Oh god, the OPA, they're moving in, they're doing police work, effectively." And we kind of joined back with Miller as in the kind of aftermath of that. And he's sat being sad, because it's Miller, and he broods on this one. And it opens with, "For 30 years, Miller had worked security. Violence and death were familiar companions to him. Men, women, animal, kids." And it lists all these horrible things he's done. And it says, but he'd never watched a war start before. And he's down at the pub. He's down in the Distinguished Hyacinth, which is where they were a few chapters ago. And people are swapping in between kind of shifts, and there's all these cops. And they're getting coffee, textured fungi and sugar sauce, and sausage with meat, maybe 1 part in 1,000. And the security kind of staff members on the TV who are kind of controlling things are trying to say it's all calm, but there'd been a nuclear bomb had been put into the docking station, which obviously in the future, when all these spaceships are nuclear powered with their Jeffrey Epstein drives, then it's a lot more chill. So it's not more chill, but more people have access to nuclear bombs and fuel, so it's more likely to happen. But someone had put one on the dock, and it had just been defused before it went off. And he sat there watching the news about this war starting between kind of the Belters and Mars over the Canterbury being blown up. And Havelock comes over and goes, "Yeah, my boy, this is fucked, isn't it?" And Miller's like, yeah, it's fucked. And how are you going to get out? Is your transfer going okay? Because Havelock had previously said he was going to try and get a transfer out of the Belt because he wasn't feeling welcome because he's an Earther in a Belt society. And he's like, "No, I haven't had an update. I'm just waiting on paperwork, I suppose." And Miller kind of goes, "Yeah, okay, cool, that's fine. But I wanted to let you know I need to take a couple of days off to try and run down some leads on Julie Mao, which is his side project." And he's basically saying, like, "Yo, the boss doesn't want me to do anything on it, but I want to do something. I like this. I keep imagining this girl alongside my ex-wife. I feel there's something going on there. I want to do it. And I'm gonna take a couple of days off. But can you just tell the boss that I'm thinking about my ex-wife? She came by and I've been drinking a lot and I've got to take," and he's heartbroken. He's hit the bottle. And Havelock's like, "Why the fuck are you doing that? Just take some holiday." And he's like, "Why would you rather people think you're dysfunctional and heartbroken than doing the actual work?" He's also like, "You've been assigned this job." And Miller's like, "I just need some time off to do it on my own," because he knows there's something going up, particularly from when he was in, I think it was last chapter, the one before, when he went through Julie Mao's computer and found the email from her dad, or the message, the universal messaging system, that was like, "Yo, something going on in the Belt, you need to get out." And Havelock just doesn't really believe him, and he kind of idly watches the news, and he can't believe in the news, all the stuff between Mars and the OPA, that Earth isn't involved, because he's like, surely they'll get involved, they just have to get their foot in it all. And he sits there and goes, "Yeah, look, I'll cover for you, but make sure it's no more than a couple of days in case someone starts asking." And Miller's like, "I appreciate it, and also look after your back," because he's obviously, Miller is worried about Havelock because he's still the Earther cop, and he's at this point he'll be alone without his partner. And it kind of ends, and Havelock goes off. In the meantime, Miller does get back to some proper detectoring. Anyway, he goes down to the jiu-jitsu center because obviously, if you remember the prelude, we found out Julie Mao is a fucking space ninja, and she's like a jiu-jitsu person who could take out all those people in low G. And he goes down there and he meets the guy who runs the place, not a sensei. I don't know. This guy's described as short but broad. He's that kind of guy. And I mean, he says, you look at him, you think an Earther, but everything about him screamed Belt. The way he wore his clothes and the way he smiled. And his smile was described as curious and serene, as like a well-fed predator. And Miller's like, "Yo, my boy, I'm security. I want some background on your students." And the bloke's like, yeah, sure thing. Where's your warrant? And he's like, "I haven't got a warrant." And he's like, "Well, okay then, I'm not telling you anything. Fuck off." And it's like studio policy, they don't talk about students. And then Miller starts going, "Oh fuck, I've got to do my thing." So he twiddles his hat. He twiddles his hat and he tries not to fidget. And he tries not to go, being like, "Please, come on. I need some information, Julie Mao. I want to help her out." And the bloke's like, he kind of describes what he's doing, and the bloke's like, "It sounds like a kidnap job." And he says, "Give me your ID." And Miller hands over the ID, and he goes, "Look, the more if we have to do a warrant, all that stuff, I have less room to maneuver because my boss wants me to do it a certain way, and I just want to help her out." And the guy's like, "Why do you want to help her out?" And he says, "I don't really know." And that's because Miller is our sad, depressive drunk who keeps imagining this girl alongside his ex-wife. And he goes into his office, and obviously the sensei guy, or the guy that runs the jiu-jitsu center, doesn't have chairs. He has those big inflatable balls, so he lowers himself onto a sphere, which I like. I like the idea that they're still knocking about those inflatable balls in space future where places may not even have gravity, but people still choose to sit on a ball, which is described as a place to rest without actually resting. And that's different, I have to admit, to our last chapter with Holden, where the whole point of that chapter was to describe when he was being interrogated by the guy who he took some pills, took some poppers, and his pupils went weird, and did his interrogation. We had that nice description at the start about the chairs being uncomfortable. Well, this guy, you can tell he's vibey because he's got chairs to rest without actually resting, and they're just big balls, which is interesting. I don't know if there's more subtext to this, if this is like a thing I have to comment on every chapter when a chair is described, but I will try and make a note. And basically they start chatting, and he's like, "What's up with Julie Mao?" And the bloke's like, Miller's like, "I know she went out for Tycho," because he found that out in the last couple of chapters. And we also know that from, and Tycho's that station, the big engineering station in the belt. That's where Frederick Johnson is, which we learned last episode, because that's where the type beam came from for Holden on the night. And then they talk a bit about her, and the last message, she's saying, Miller's like, "The last message I got from her was from Earth, down from Luna," and the bloke says "down the well," being the gravity well, and he says it with a sound that made it basically says it, the way he says it is like it's like a disease, this "down the well" thing. They just hate the idea of this gravity well. And Miller's trying to find out what's going on here, what's going on with her, and the bloke doesn't really have information, but he says, "I'll find out what I can for you," and he repeats that about 4 times. And Miller tries to get some background, and he finds out that Julie's been there for quite a few years, and she joined because she was once attacked in the belt, and she was like beaten up and mugged, and ever since then she joined jiu-jitsu, and she kind of trained really hard. And when she left the asteroid and went on, she was worked on a spaceship, so when she was there with no gravity, or less gravity on the ship, she never came back weaker. Which the bloke was like, she trained really hard, she trained all the time, because most people go away and they lose their strength, but Julie never did. And Miller's like, "She's a pretty girl, did she have any lovers or anything, and friends?" And the guy's like, "Not really, not many," and didn't want to give any details about it. And Miller's like, "That seems strange given how smart, attractive, etc. she is." So again, Miller being a lonely, depressive drunk. And he starts asking about what ships and stuff like that, and the bloke continues to repeat, "I'll find out what I can for you." And he doesn't give any information, even when Miller's asking about the OPA allegiance. And eventually then Miller just leaves. Which is an interesting one. So you can see the bloke clearly, the sensei kind of clearly cares about Julie, and it is thinking about helping out and gives some information because he knows Miller's trying to help out. But a lot of it he's holding back between, "I'll find what I can for you." So he clearly knows more and is holding off. And we'll find out why in a moment. So we cut, and Miller is back in his hole, not his home, his little hole, and he's watching on the news. A few chapters ago, as an anecdote, there was a science station on Phoebe, which is ran by inners, and no belters are allowed on it. And that's been hit by something, maybe like a rock or a missile, and everyone is either dead or missing. And it's a bit of it's the first bit of vandalism with a body count from the OPA. What people are assuming is the OPA. And Miller sat there and he says there was nothing, not one single goddamn thing that he could do to stop it being the war happening. And he couldn't even slow him down. And Julie Mao grinned at him from the still frame, her pinnace beside her. And he sat there kind of drinking away and watching all the news and getting a bit miserable and imagining this girl. And he kind of mulls on people that he's met with all his victims of crime over the years. He says most people pretend it never happened and try and continue on with their lives. And that was about half. There's about 40%. They sit there and they use an excuse to be mean to everybody, like they've now earned this right to be dicks after they've suffered some crime. And then he says the final few, they suck it up, learn the lesson, and moved on. And he says the Julies, the good ones. So he's been sat there for a while, and then also his door rings. He says Miller stood up, less steady on his feet than he'd expected. He counted the bottles on the table. There were more than he'd thought. And he gets to the door, and the acne-pocked man who was there a couple of chapters ago has an OPA armband. And it was the guy who killed Mateo Judd, who we know is a policeman, and he comes in and he says hello. And he's like, "Detective Miller, I think we got off the wrong foot. I was hoping we could try again. May I come in?" And Miller goes, "I try not to take strange men home, even I don't even know your name. And the bloke says, I'm Anderson Dawes, and I'm the liaison officer for the OPA on series, and I think we can help each other. And he walks in and he stares at all of Miller's empty bottles. And Miller's swearing at himself on the inside and willing a sobriety he didn't feel, which I think is a vibe that many of us have felt early on a Saturday morning. And Dawes comes in and says, look, I need a favour from you, and I'm going to pay for it, but I'm not going to pay with money, with information. And he says, I want you to stop looking for Juliet Mao. Miller's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And he sits there and he realises that the Mr. Serene Jiu-Jitsu instructor was working for the OPA, which is obviously why he wasn't giving much information to Miller. What I find out for you is really, I'm going to speak to the OPA and see if you're to be trusted or not. And Anderson Dawes comes in and says, look, Julie was working for us the entire time. And we don't want you finding her. We want us to find her, and it's important that we're the people to find her, not you. And Miller sat there thinking there's a right thing to say, there's something he should say, but if he just feels too fuzzy to answer it, because obviously he's pissed. And Anderson Dawes kind of goes further and says, look, Miller, you may be a belter through and through, you lived out here, but you work for an inner corporation, and right now we want the OPA to find the OPA members and look after each other, rather than you, some people would say you're basically an inner because you work for them, like the radicals on the OPA. And he's like, yeah, something happened, so we need to find her. And they kind of talk about her background a bit, because obviously she's the heiress, or she's related to a really rich Earther who owns that Mal Kwiatkowski, or whatever it is, the guy from Monsters Inc., like a big trading ship. And he basically says, until we know what happened, I can't have you stirring up the water, Miller. It's muddy enough now. And the trade he's offering is when we find her, once we found her, we'll tell Miller, Dawes will tell Miller what happened. And he says it's a generous offer, considering who you are, employee of an Earther, partner of an Earther. Some people would think that makes you the enemy too. And he says, look, we both want the same thing, about stability, so just take the deal. And Miller goes, right, I've got 2 questions for you. And he asks about the riot gear. So you remember, I think it was like 3 chapters ago now, or maybe like 3 Miller chapters ago now, they were having the riots after Holden had done his first announcement. And he was like, who took the riot gear? Because they went there and it was all gone. And Dawes doesn't know. Dawes says it wasn't us. And then Miller asks about the Golden Bough Society and the local Grieger. So that was the last chapter, all the people doing extortion, what's happened to them, which has been a thing for the last few chapters of Miller, like where have all the normal crime gone? And Dawes goes, I don't know either, but I'll find out for you. And Miller's like, all right, you can't answer 2 very basic questions. I don't trust you. I'm going to keep trying to find her. And Miller says, Anderson Dawes says, you're making a mistake. And he looks sour. And he says, and Miller's, yeah, it won't be my first. And Anderson Dawes leaves after that. And then Miller, obviously, because it's Miller, he returns to drinking for a little bit until he realizes he's doing the wrong thing. He'd been stupid, worse, he'd been self-indulgent, drinking himself into a stupor instead of doing the work. And he sits there and he starts thinking about it, and he finds the ship she was on going away, and then all of a sudden he has he goes to sleep for a bit, and he wakes up and he rings Havelock. Havelock's like, yeah, what the fuck's up, mate? It's like, because it's obviously midnight, by that point they should be asleep. And he's like, Havelock, look, you need to leave. Someplace they're not going to start killing Earthers for shits and giggles if things go pear-shaped. And he's saying, the OPA guy who came round, and Miller's like, I think he's scared, I think he's nervous, things are going on he can't control. And Havelock kind of wakes up suddenly and goes, Jesus, what scares the OPA? And then the chapter ends. So a nice one there. I think it's a little bit slow. I think you do get some background though, so you learn a bit more about Julie and kind of with her jiu-jitsu stuff. But you also, I think, there kind of start learning about the OPA and its decentralized net kind of like framework. So we learned that a bit with Frederick Johnson last episode, where he's like, my voice is loud and counsels rather than being in control. And you see there that there are things happening that are even outside the OPA's control. So they're not some big boogeyman who stole the riot gear and killed the criminals. Something else is doing that. Or at least Anderson Dawes isn't saying it either way. Because you learn a bit more about this kind of decentralized network, but you also see they are kind of rivals to Mars, and they're the main Delta kind of powerhouse against them, and they need to be the ones to look after Julie and find her, because otherwise it would look like they've taken the heiress to this Inner's Earther kind of company and taken her out the game, which obviously isn't what you want to see, because Havelock was saying at the very start of this, like, why aren't Earth involved? Like, and this would obviously lead to Earth getting more involved. Yeah, so it's a good one there. A little bit slower. I think you get some good background, and you get a bit more information about how Miller works, kind of his failings as a person, but also kind of what he's good at, and this thing that he's looking after Havelock as well. And you see there's things going on, and people are getting quite worried about this war. But yeah, cheers for that, guys, and I hope you have a lovely week.